Welcome to Trifecta Collective, finding the root, where we dive deep into understanding and addressing root causes of chronic health issues so you can help and find healing inside and out, now and forever. Hello, and welcome to Trifecta Collective, finding the root. I'm Megan Abbott, owner and founder of the holistic health practice Trifecta Collective. Welcome to the podcast. Today, I am very excited to talk about really just how do we get into working out? How do we get back into working out? What are some things to maybe think about? If you're new to strength training, especially, I'm going to talk about some suggestions and programming and things to think about. And I've been in the personal training space, if you don't know, for over a decade now, as of the recording of this podcast. And I've worked with a lot of beginners. I've worked with a lot of people who maybe did some things in high school and or college, maybe did some rec sports at some point, and just we're pretty new to the space and or just getting back into the space. I've also had to do this with myself a handful of times, especially as I was recovering from my own injuries and chronic pain issues after my car accident in 2017. And I had to essentially rebuild my whole body. And I continue, while I'm not doing active in-person personal training, I continue to walk a lot of people through this process and, talk through a lot of the things that can come up and some things to think about and considerations, aches and pains that maybe pop up, and just a lot of things to think about. So let's dive right into this. So this is really going to be for beginners and or people who are looking to get back into this. So if you're experienced, if you're advanced in the working out space, strength training space, this may not be the most helpful for you. And if you have any issue like chronic pain type issues, mobility issues, limitations, this might be really valuable for you as well. So the biggest thing I really think about when it comes to strength training, I think first and foremost, form and mechanics are fundamentals. If you don't know how to do these things correctly, that can be a big hindrance. And this is really where I think, especially if you are brand new, you have never strength trained before, there's a lot of value in hiring a good, and not all of them are good, and I can go over some tips and tricks with this too, of how do you find a good in-person personal trainer? And what does that really look like? How do you kind of vet this person? And I also say this as someone who was a general manager of some big box gyms. I was also a manager of a mobile personal training company, prior owner of that company, hired, managed, trained a lot of other personal trainers too. So this is both my own personal experiences with clients and also teaching other trainers how to do this as well. So for me, the fundamentals is one, we want to know where you are right now. And you can do this by yourself. And also, this is where a valuable personal trainer who is well versed in body mechanics, who's not just trying to punish you or trying to get you to throw up or trying to do these crazy hard workouts. No, we're really talking about how do we open up the body and help us really get our bodies into a place where when we do go to actually start to strengthen, we're going to do this in a way that is going to be the most optimal for our body. And by the way, we're always going to have, I'd say minor imbalances, minor differences between our left and our right sides, some things that old injuries can definitely flare and can be there. I'll tell you just for me personally. So I've had multiple injuries to my right ankle, sprained my right ankle several times. I also ended up with some issues after my car accident because of my right leg, and I lost feeling in my right leg. Also, no one believed me when I told them I lost feeling in my right leg because I still had access to some of my muscular strength and I had done so much mind-body connection that I could access certain muscles. And it was, the differences were pretty minor from a Western medical standpoint. and they were significant for me. And I can still tell a difference, especially when I squat, that I have to warm up my right ankle a little bit more than my left. There are some very minor limitations I have where I just have to be really careful about foot position and different things like that. And because I do have this knowledge and I am very aware of this, I can tell you that video, you can't tell. Anyone else looks at me, even someone very well trained, you're not going to be able to tell. And I can feel a difference, which goes a long way because once again, you know your body best. No one is ever going to know your body like you do. Trust that more than anything. So step number one, I would say, is where are we? Let's do a movement assessment. By the way, we have a movement assessment available on our website. We don't talk about it very much. It's called the Functional Diagnostic Screening Test, and it walks through a series of tests throughout the body. Very simple, very basic that you can do on yourself. And this is really looking at bigger, not necessarily small, we're not looking at small muscle groups, but we're looking at major dysfunction and how that is going to present in the body. And I'll tell you, I learned this in a variety of courses I took. However, the best thing that's not even really a course, but really almost a program, I would say, is from Mind Pump. If you're not familiar with Mind Pump, it is really 4 guys who founded this, 3 of which were longtime personal trainers who were already in the health and wellness space, came together, and they can share their stories. I am also would love to have any one of them on the podcast here at some point. And they're phenomenal. They were life-changing for me. Their programs, I have quite a few of their programs. I am an affiliate with their programs, and one of the best educations I ever got from a mobility, structural, body mechanic standpoint. And I have taken a corrective exercise certification, by the way. And I think their program they have 2 along here that I'm going to talk about, are better than these actual programs that I've purchased and gotten certified in. So they have a program. We'll also put a link below in case you're interested in learning more about them. They have a podcast. They have thousands and thousands of episodes at this point. They have tons of programs. They have a private Facebook group that I think is well worth the money, especially if you're just starting off with. They have different guides and resources. They have tons of materials. Their programs are extremely, extremely well written and very reasonably priced, in my opinion, for what you're actually getting. They are going to range a little over $100. They are DIY kinds of things, and they've got specials going on all the time on different programs. They have podcast episodes about each one of their programs. Anyways, I think they're a phenomenal group of individuals with amazing resources. So they have a program called MAPS Prime Pro that, once again, if you're new to this and you don't want to work with a trainer, or maybe that's not available for you at this time, this program is worth its weight in gold, in my opinion, especially if you are new to this space. And once again, they ran through a series of tests, very similar to what I've put together. It's a little bit different. I've kind of structured it just a little bit differently than theirs, just based on my personal experience and how I was using this. And I've used this on myself. I've used this with clients for probably my last 3 or 4 years of doing in-personal training. So this is coming from very highly practiced and implemented in everything that I learned and was actually using. So this goes through a series of tests, just like at body mechanics. What's shoulder mobility? How's your hip mobility? What about ankles? What about shoulder blade strength? Like, are you hunched forward and kind of down here? What about glute activation? We go through the body and look at these different things. And one of the things that often happens as we age, and this is age actually the thing, it is a little bit of a, if you don't use it, you'll lose it kind of thing. And most of us get much more sedentary as we start to get older. And older, I mean, even into like our mid to late 20s, into our 30s for sure, in our 40s, 100%. And then certainly, even more as we continue to get older. But we're sitting more, stress is higher. Oftentimes we are moving less and also doing certain movements oftentimes a little bit less, especially if you've developed some aches and pains. Maybe you got some other health stuff going on. I know for me, my back issues were very much exacerbated by all my gut stuff going on and the bloating. And there's a big reason for that I am gonna talk about pelvic floor and bloating specifically, because this is also really important and something that a lot of our clients deal with specifically, and something that took me a really long time to understand in my own healing journey as well. So we want to start opening up the body and correcting some of these basic imbalances. And I think the easiest one for me to verbally talk about is really looking at the upper body, looking at posture, looking at what is our neck doing? Is our neck kind of forward? Is it down? Is it super straight now? Which, by the way, our neck should have just a slight, it's really like this, a slight curve to it, which is natural, and that's what's supposed to happen. And we can't absolutely lose that over time. That is something that happened to me. And I know, forward neck, if you're looking at your computer a whole lot, and maybe you start to lose your eyesight when you're in your 30s and your 40s. And so you start having to look a little bit closer, maybe squint on some things. We can get that forward head. If you're on your phone a whole lot, you might have the downward head. Our shoulders start to roll forward more. Our shoulder blades aren't doing quite as much. Maybe we lose strength in between our shoulder blades. Maybe we carry a lot of stress, and you feel a lot of that in your upper traps, which is right essentially on top of like you got your shoulders and then you keep going up towards your neck. Like those are your upper traps. Those oftentimes get super overactive, and that can cause a lot of neck pain. That can cause a lot of stiffness, tightness, just discomfort around our whole neck. And so one of the easiest or simplest ways to look at all of this is basically you go stand up against a wall. I call it a wall test. You can also look up on YouTube. By the way, I have I think all of these videos are available to the public on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. So I'll also put a link to our YouTube channel on here. So if you go and just like search wall test, you're going to find a video, one, if not a couple of videos on this that I've done, and whether this is with myself or doing it with someone else that I had walking them through it and taped it to show online. So you go stand up against this wall. Your feet are going to be a few inches in front of the wall. You're going to put your butt, your tailbone, essentially up against the wall. And then you're going to try and get your spine as flat against that wall as you can. Arms are coming up you want your elbows right around shoulder height, maybe just a tiny bit below. And you're trying to press everything, essentially your entire backside, from the tips of your fingers, the back of your hand, your wrists, your elbows, your shoulders, your spine, from as much as you can, like the base of your skull down to your tailbone, up against the wall. Most people cannot do this, and we're going to see some different things. And the big things that we'll often see is we'll see you can't get the whole neck up against the wall, and that's usually from the forward head positioning. And a lot of times either the elbows can't touch the same times as the wrist, or we'll get wrists, but we can't get the fingertips, in which case there's some shoulder mobility issues, which is very common. That's coming from that more forward shoulder kind of position that we'll get. And the last thing that we'll often see is people can't get their kind of mid to lower back flat, in which case we have what's called a pelvic tilt, meaning that you probably stick your butt out a little bit and you have an over exaggeration of your spinal curve kind of from your mid to lower back down. And that can cause a lot of pain and discomfort too. It also shifts kind of how our hips are working, and a lot of the muscles in like our glute muscles, and even with our quads, which is in the front, in the top of our legs, our hamstrings, which is the back of our legs, things like that. And we'll see dysfunction going on there. You may also have some weaker core muscles if you can't get that back flat, because you probably are taking some of your core muscles out of that whole situation, because we should be a little bit more tucked under, and our deeper pelvic floor muscles are maybe these muscles on our stomach, on the side of our stomach, called our transverse abdominis muscles, and or TVA. And especially if you've had kids, there's often a lot of issues going on in the pelvic floor, TVA. Sometimes we have some other muscles doing more work than they should be, and there's a lot of imbalances. So this wall test is one of the tests that I used to really, really enjoy running, and just would show us a lot about what's going on with the upper body. And so once we test and we know and what is going on, where do we have some of our major dysfunction? And by the way, you might have total body dysfunction
which is fine. You can absolutely come back from that. And just because your whole body is quote unquote a mess, by the way, it's not, it's just there's dysfunction going on, we can fix it. Yeah, we can absolutely fix it. And once again, if you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s, if you had some joint replacements done, yeah, there might be some limitations in the ranges of motion that we're able to fully accomplish. And I've seen massive, massive improvements even with individuals in their 70s that had, I had multiple clients, both shoulders replaced, both hips replaced, knee replacements, ankle surgeries, foot surgeries, all kinds of things going on. And we still saw massive improvement in ranges of motion, in strength, in body composition, and pain levels going down, which is obviously a really big one, and ability to do more things on their own. So that's a whole piece. I'm also going to do a whole other episode on body image where I talk about function and aesthetics and different things kind of along these lines too. So I'm going to save some of that side of things because I feel myself wanting to get into that. But I save it for this other episode that I'm going to record. So when we think about this, so we now we know, okay, where is some of this dysfunction going on, and where are our biggest kind of problem areas or room for improvement? If we want to think on the more positive side, where do we have a lot of room for improvement to grow from? So now that we know that, now we want to start working on our ranges of motion, and it's not just ranges of motion, because a lot of people will start stretching to increase their ranges of motion. And here's the thing. Range of motion is important. What is more important in my eyes is strength and control through ranges of motion. And if you've ever met someone with hypermobility issues, if you have hypermobility issues, these are other considerations that we need to take into account. And my advice is a little different for these individuals because training needs to look different, because the ranges of motion are there too much. They're there too much. And we need to limit ranges of motion as opposed to increase. However, what we do want to increase is strength and control through ranges of motion, which is important and valuable for everyone. And really where I think about this is, yeah, you're going to have changes in your physical appearance as you start to go through this. And I'm going to talk about that too. But really, I think longer term, where I come from with a lot of the fitness side of things is, when I'm 80, I want to be able to sit on a toilet by myself and get up. I want to be able to reach into a cabinet overhead and grab something. I want to be able to bend down and pick something up. I want to be able to look behind me in the car and grab something if I need it. And I want to have access to these ranges of motion. If I fall, I want to be able to push myself up off the ground so I can get help. These are the things that I really think about, and largely because I've worked with a lot of clients in advanced ages and seeing some of the things that can happen. And I just in my education, I learned a lot of things that can happen. And that's not where I want to be when I'm 60, 70, 80, 90 years old. I want to have as much control and independence as I possibly can. And I know these things long term lead to that, and also lead to less pain, lead to better overall metabolic health, better brain health, better mood, better physical appearances, and a lot more flexibility in what we have when it comes to nutrition and movement and all of these things kind of overall. So then we want to start working on strength through ranges of motion. And while stretching can be valuable in certain circumstances, really what we're looking for is active stretching. And so there's kind of three words that I'll use that mean very similar things to me: active stretching, corrective exercise, and or mobility work. And mobility is really the term that I am going to use probably most frequently as I talk about this, because really mobility work is opening up different ranges of motion while also increasing strength through these ranges of motion. And, once again, like just going off of the same example here, what is a mobility exercise that can help someone with these mobility issues in the upper body, this kind of forward head, forward rounded posture? Maybe the butt is sticking way out. We've got some chest protruding forward here as a result of that. And by the way, a lot of women have this particular stance and particular way of being for aesthetic reasons. So largely is where we learn a lot of this from. So when we go to do mobility work, corrective exercise work, active stretching, we can actually take that same test, that wall test, and make it into a mobility exercise. And so instead of just trying to hold and push everything against there and just kind of hold it there, what we'll do is repetitions of that, where I will ask a client to hold that position, let's say for 5 seconds, and really push, like really trying to actually push everything against the wall, really focusing. By the way, you're going to have a double chin when you do this particular exercise, and really actively push your body against the wall. And then you're going to relax. You're going to hold that position for probably anywhere between 5 or 10 seconds and then relax. And that's going to be one repetition. And so we're going to do that, maybe depending on the person, 3 to 8 reps of that. And maybe we're doing that once a day. Maybe we're doing that a couple times a day. Maybe we're doing that a couple times a week. Depends on the person, where they are, and how this is going to fit into their lifestyle. I will say corrective exercise work, mobility work, frequency makes a big difference. And for me, my hips in particular were a massive issue when I had my lower back pain, chronic lower back pain after my car accident. When I started figuring out what was going on with me, my hips were playing a huge role with internal and external rotation. And so I had 2 staple exercises. Once again, you can go on YouTube, but these are all on my YouTube page. I've also done mobility challenges within our Facebook group. So I have a ton of resources all about this. And this is something that we do cover with clients pretty regularly, especially if they are dealing with chronic pain and or whenever they're looking to get into more of a strength training or become more active or things like that. We'll often start talking about these things. So for me, my hips, the two movements that I would do, I would try and do these like 3 to 5 times a day to really try and because I was in a lot of pain, I was sitting a lot for my job at that time. I was doing more behind the scenes work versus active personal training, which the active personal training thing was great as far as movement is concerned, because I'd be practicing, I'd be standing, I'd be sitting, I'd be changing my positioning quite a bit, and it was awesome for just my overall mobility. So it was a big shift when I started doing a lot more sitting, a lot more computer type work for my jobs. So opening up the hips, so shin boxes, which is basically you're sitting on your butt. You can put your hands behind you as a starting point, and you're gonna put your knees to one side, and then you're basically going to switch sides. It's almost like a windshield or, windshield wipers, kind of going back and forth. Now, you don't want to go that fast. You want to hold it, once again, hold for about 5 seconds and then kind of switch, and then hold for about 5 seconds and then switch. And you're focusing on strength, control, and increasing ranges of motion. So that was a big one for me. 90-90 was another really big one for me. And that's still one I do almost daily because it feels really good, especially right now. I'm not hiking very much. I'm not going on super long walks, especially because it's 105 essentially every day here in Arizona, and it's really hot. So, and that is very new to me still, and my body has not adjusted. So I am trying to do more of the mobility work and especially like frequency to make sure my body stays in a pretty good spot. So those were things that I did multiple times a day. And it's not like it takes long. You could just start with 1, 2, and that's okay. Where are you feeling it the most? Where was the most amount of discomfort or struggle when it came to these tests that we did? So let's start there. Let's start with just one area, and then we can always add in a second one. And by the way, when you get more comfortable starting to do this work, and it is really a very much learning experience when you get started, it's just a learning experience. You're going to learn a lot along the way, and it's going to get easier as you go. And it's going to be, it might be hard. It might be confusing. You might not totally know 100% what you're doing. And by the way, there's so many good resources and free videos on YouTube, among many other things. Once again, Mind Pump also has amazing, amazing videos and their cues, how they talk through things. Like they have a whole YouTube channel as well. Mind Pump TV is typically what I'll search when I'll still include some of their videos when I'm putting a program together for a client, because I just think they're super, super good. So starting to do mobility work here and start to open up the body. By the way, this is also a form of strength training. Strength training doesn't have to be just going to the gym, lifting weights, doing, barbells, kettlebells, all of these things. Strength training can be as simple as this mobility work, because you are going to get stronger, by the way. Then I'll often recommend, once we start doing that, and then the mobility work really turns into a warm up for an actual workout. And by the way, I still do mobility work before I work out. And I spend anywhere between about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the day and how I'm feeling, depending on what I'm also doing. If I'm doing fuller body lifts, like barbell type lifts, if I'm squatting, if I'm deadlifting, different things like that, my mobility is going to be a little bit different depending on my workout and the intensity of it, and also how I'm feeling. And when was the last time I worked out? Have I worked out 3 times this week? Is this my first time in a week? What does that really look like? And I customize that and shift and change it depending on what my schedule has been, which is also what I encourage other people to do. And okay, what are you doing today for your workout? How do we open up those pieces of your body to optimize your range of motion, your strength through those ranges of motion, as a warm-up in preparation for these movements that someone may do? So that's a huge piece of this. And there are mobility exercises for just about every part of your body, starting at neck, shoulders, all parts of your back, your hips, your ankles, your fingers, your wrists, your ankles, your toes, your feet, everything. There are mobility exercises for just about everything. Twisting, rotational type movements, that's another really big one. So really look into those. If you're interested, once again, we have a free guide to start walking you through that if you need it. By the way, I don't talk about this super often, but I did create a do-it-yourself, a DIY program called Life Force Ignite. And this is a big piece of that, where I actually walk through mobility work and then I get into sample beginner workouts. And it is only $47, and you get access to this for lifetime. And we talk about nutrition, lifestyle, movement, nervous system regulation, and then there's a whole section on supplements if someone wants to include supplements. And I mean, that section alone, I think the video I recorded for that is almost an hour in and of itself. I have spreadsheets and tools and tracking and a variety of things to help you really get started. And this is all of the work that we do with clients at the beginning. So this really came from, once again, personal experience of someone who maybe didn't have the finances to work with us right in that moment. I wanted to be able to give them something and have access to something that was going to help them and could guide them through this. So I'll also put a link to that in the show notes here. So once we've started opening up the body and the body's in a little bit of a better position from a mobility perspective, then we can start with some maybe more traditional style strength training. Once again, if you're new to this, start with body weight. This is crucial. You do not have to jump into even bands. I do think bands is like the next step above that. A suspension type trainer like a TRX is a great tool, great resource. But there are so many things you can do just with your body weight that can make a massive, 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 massive difference. And this is a phenomenal place to start. And when you're going to start, what I usually recommend is start with unilateral style training, meaning one side of your body at a time as much as is possible. Now, some of the movements, some certain things may not lend themselves to be done one side at a time. And sometimes we can come up with some different variations that do allow for that. But that goes a really long way in, once again, we're thinking about, let's get that body strong. Let's make some real changes here. And we're looking at long-term health. Once again, your physique will also benefit from this. And if you are a more experienced person in the gym with working out, by the way, going through a round of unilateral training and cycling that in at least once a year is invaluable. I still do that. I probably say right now, at least half of my training is unilateral training, at least half, if sometimes a little bit more than that as I cycle through my training, because I know how valuable it really is. Going back to Mind Pump has a program called MAPS Symmetry that is focused on exactly this. And it actually starts out with the TRX or suspension type trainer, which you can get pretty cheap, by the way, and you can use this at home. You can just put it in a doorway and it works out super, super well. I have done that many, many, many times. And it's a great tool. I have I have a TRX, but personally, and it's so easy to just put in a doorway, and I've never had any issues. Just make sure it's very sturdy when you hook it up, and it's a door that fully closes. Otherwise, you are likely to fall when you're doing something. So unilateral style training, one side of the body at a time. And just I'm gonna name a few exercises out there. Once again, like there's videos on this on our page, on a variety of other pages as well. But things I really like, I always think if you listen back to, I did a strength training, one or two strength training podcast solo episodes at some point over the last year or so where I talk about this. And basic movements, I think of some sort of squatting motion. I think of some sort of like picking up motion. And the squatting motion is a sitting and standing motion is really where I'm going with that. Deadlifting or picking something up off the ground and being able to stand back up. I think of something overhead. Once again, can you reach something from a cabinet overhead? I think about, can you push yourself off the ground if something were to happen? And then can you pull things, which is really, we think about like the back and shoulders. So I kind of structure a lot of these things around these 5 major style of movements because I'd say with one exception here, this is going to keep you in a pretty good spot. The other thing I'll add to that is some sort of rotational type movement, being able to twist and bend and reach back behind you. Because at some point, I have known too many people who have tried to pick up something from like just beside them or just behind them, pet food, just a grocery bag, and thrown out their back of any place in their back because of that. So I'm a big fan of rotational movements on top of those big 5. So unilateral movements to get started. Single leg toe touch. That's going to set you up for a deadlift. By the way, all of these things have very nice progressions that we can use that go from body weight to bands to maybe cables and or TRX to dumbbells and then to barbells. So there's a lot of thought and mythology behind a good personal trainer and going through these type of movements and helping someone progress. And progression is not necessarily always about just getting stronger. It can be about increasing range of motion, about increasing balance, stability, all of these things. Our balance also starts to go away as we get older, which is another reason why this unilateral one side at a time style training has massive, massive benefits. So single leg toe touch is going to mimic a deadlift long term. So, once again, I have videos here and it's really good for your backside. This is going to help work your calves, your hamstrings, your glutes, and your low back in a safe and effective way if done appropriately for the individual. I think for single leg squatting positions, there's a lot of different options here. This can look like a lunge, like a stationary lunge. This might look like, I call them single leg stand-ups, where you basically sit on something, not too low as the starting point. Otherwise, you're going to set yourself up for failure. But sitting on a high chair or a bench and then standing up just with one leg, much more challenging than you think it is. This might look like a Bulgarian split squat. Those are the big ones that come to mind. I'm sure there's other ones as well, but those are the big ones that come to mind. And once again, we're working on strength from one side at a time. If we think about the back, a single arm row is a great one. If we think about body weight, prone cobra is one of the big ones that I typically use. That is a bilateral type movement. However, you can really focus it on one side at a time. When you cue yourself appropriately. Mind Pump has a great video on how to do a prone cobra. Chest, some sort of like lifting chest. Yeah, you can do that absolutely one side. I think it is easier with a band to do one side at a time. I like a press up. A press up to your knees is a really good one. And you just really be conscious about how much pressure you're putting on each hand and what that really looks like. You can also do that on a wall, by the way. Counters is usually where I started with a lot of my older clients in being able to do this pressing motion or like a push up, chest press, bench press. That's kind of where we're going with it. Some sort of overhead press. This might look like a wall press. And what I mean is very similar to that position that I was describing, this wall test. It's called a wall angel, where basically you're doing that same kind of positioning where you're standing up against the wall, you're trying to press everything back against the wall, and now you're trying to move your arms up overhead, up towards your ears, and then bring it back down while keeping everything back against the wall. Once again, start really simple with this, like just how far can you get your elbows up before you have to come back down so that you can keep everything back against that wall. That goes a really long way. That's a really good one for using a band. A Z press is one of my all-time favorite movements that I don't see programmed all that often. That is one that I learned from Mind Pump that I'm a huge fan of doing a Z press. So much value with core stability and shoulder mobility with that. And I love that you can use a band. You can also use a dumbbell. You can use a kettlebell. There's a lot of different ways to do this. Core can be a little bit more challenging doing one side at a time, but things like a bird dog one side at a time, that's really great. Doing my goodness, I just lost the name of it. So you're laying on your back, dead bug. Here we go. I knew it'd come to me. So a dead bug is a really great exercise, and you can start with just tapping your toes one side at a time on the ground while keeping your back totally flat. Single leg glute bridges are another really, really good one. I'll say for women who have back pain and or glute pain, piriformis syndrome is a big one that a lot of women suffer from, especially post children. However, it is not specific to that. I had piriformis syndrome myself. Once again, like this really goes into the hip mobility and glute strength. There's some core involved in that as well. But doing a single leg glute bridge, super great, super valuable, lots and lots of benefits from that, and activation to help really heal your back pain and things like that. So all of these unilateral movements are really valuable, really important, and a great starting point. And you can do this once a week. You can do it twice a week, 2 or 3 times a week. Maybe you do just one exercise a day, and that's how you decide to do it. There is no right or wrong way to strength train, by the way. You do not have to do, oh, today I'm doing legs. Oh, today I'm doing my arms. Today I'm doing my chest. I prefer full body movements. I prefer full body workouts. It is a very, very rare occasion where I'm not looking at my full body, and there's a lot of reasons for that I'm not super going to get into here. I think that's for another episode, but full body movements is 100%, in my opinion, especially for beginners, the way to go here. Another note about starting unilateral training. You want to start on your weaker side. And there is an ego check that comes into this, especially if you are not new and just getting back in. I find this a lot with former high school and college athletes as well, where we have to really check our ego in understanding, okay, look, this is my weaker side. I'm going to match my movements to my weaker side, and I'm really going to focus on prioritizing balance and equal strength as much as possible. And I don't think strength is ever going to be 100% equal between our two sides for almost anyone. And that is okay. And this is also why incorporating unilateral training at some point every year can have a lot of value. So you want to start on your weaker side and you match your other side to the weaker side. So if you can only do 10 reps comfortably and perfectly, which is the criteria for being able to do a repetition of an exercise with control perfectly, I do not recommend going to failure, especially for beginners here. There's a time and a place for that, and it is not at the very beginning. So if you can only do 10 reps of a movement on your, let's say your left side, you only do 10 repetitions on your right side. Even if you feel like you can do 15 or 20, you only do 10. And that's where you leave it. And I know, once again, I know for a lot of you that can be really challenging from a mental standpoint and really checking on your ego and making sure you are matching specifically to your weaker side. And you'll see the strength increases pretty quickly, especially with consistency here. So that's really important and really valuable information. So start on your weaker side, match your stronger side to your weaker side. And then you can slowly progress here. And what does this look like? I don't have specific criteria. I would say once we get up to about 15-ish reps on something and you're like, I could probably do more, then it's probably time to switch it up. And maybe we start to add in some bands. Maybe we start to add in some dumbbells or kettlebells. Kettlebells, by the way, are really great for stability style training. If you are new to them, I highly recommend working with someone who is at least familiar with them for a session, even just a session or two, and learning more about that. That goes a really long way. So that's really how I kind of recommend getting back into this training. Take it slow. It is not all or nothing. One of the worst things you can do from a mentality standpoint is you are 100% on or 100% off, and there's no in between. Life does not work like that. Do your best. If, for me this year, because stress has been very high, with my partner getting his cancer diagnosis, would I love to be working out in a gym with a barbell 3 times a week? 100%. I would love that. That's when I feel my best. And that is not feasible for me at this time and hasn't been for most of this year. So most of my workouts have been between 1 to 3 times a week, depending on the week. I don't beat myself up if I only get to the gym once a week. And that can be hard in and of itself. I get it. I know. Also going back, if I've had to take a week or two off, getting back in, I start back a little bit later because I know one of the worst things I can do is go too heavy, too hard, too intense because that's too much of a stressor on my body. And remember, working out is a stressor. It is a great stressor. And we need to be mindful of our total stress load. So if you are going through a lot, maybe 3 times a week is not where you want to start. Maybe you just start with mobility once or twice a week, and that's it. And that's okay. That is a wonderful, wonderful place to start. So, 2 things before I wrap up. So, in finding a personal trainer, interview many, many. Ask one of the telltale questions I used to tell people is ask if they listen to Mind Pump or are familiar with Mind Pump. If they listen to Mind Pump or are familiar with them, they're probably going to be at least a decent trainer. I learned a lot as a personal trainer, listening to them and learning from them, going through their programs personally and putting other clients through their programs or versions of their programs and things like that. It's a great way. Also, are they trying to kill you? Do they focus mostly on high intensity workouts? Really? Just set expectations. Hey, I am looking for a trainer who can help me with form. I'm just getting back into this. I'm just starting with this. I am looking to improve my range of motion, improve my strength. And yes, weight loss may be a goal, and biomechanics and really, really learning biomechanics, fundamental. Some personal trainers also will not teach big lifts, squats, or deadlifts specifically. Find someone else. Find someone who can and has the experience and knowledge to comfortably put you through that. A trainer who is a little bit more experienced will be probably, likely, hopefully, a little bit more open to working with you along those lines. So just some things to think about. The other thing I wanted to touch on is some of the core work, pelvic floor type work. So one of the things that will often happen, especially with if you have chronic gut issues, if you have issues with bloating, which is a lot of our clients, that was also me. One of the things that happens that we may not even think about is our pelvic floor. We can have a lot of issues with our pelvic floor. If you have constipation issues, same thing, by the way, in that these are deep core muscles, very deep in our very lower belly. We also have our TVA, which is our transverse abdominis, which is on the sides of our bellies. We also need to think about our obliques, our QLs, our erector spinae, all of these things and how they are working together. If it's possible for you or feasible for you to see a pelvic floor physical therapist, someone who specializes in pelvic floor physical therapy, so much value, especially if you have kids and even if you've not had kids, and especially if you've had a long history of gut issues. This was one of the most valuable things that I did in my healing journey and just being able to learn. They did internal and external testing with me and structuring and doing some different exercises, even breathing exercises. Dr. Joe on YouTube also has some fantastic videos on some basic, like where to start with some pelvic floor work that I'm a huge fan of and have recommended quite often. If you just search Dr. Joe, J-O, it is a female, on YouTube, and Dr. Joe pelvic floor, she will pop right up, I promise. But she is one of my favorite physical therapists on YouTube overall. I think she has some great videos and content. But these muscles can really be inactive, be turned off. We can have a lot of compensation patterns when we've had a long history of bloating. So doing work specifically around pelvic floor, around core, and this is male or female, by the way. I've watched plenty of males through this type of work, and they can be a little uncomfortable sometimes. And man, do we see a huge benefits long term from this. Decreases in pain, increases in overall strength are two of the biggest ones here. So yeah, focusing on that can be really important and really valuable. And I also find a lot of value in unilateral core work. Once again, like going back to those several exercises I mentioned, wood choppers, polyp presses, single leg polyp presses are all really good one. Like single arm marches or carries of any sort. And there's a variety of variations that go along with that. Those are all really great and really valuable. So I hope that gives you some insight into, if you are a beginner, if you are looking to get into this, if you're looking to get back into this, maybe you're looking to do this better than when you last did it. Hopefully this gave you some tips, some tricks, some things to think about, some resources to look into here. And I hope you enjoyed this. If you have questions about this, if you want me to dive deeper into any specific topic, please don't hesitate to reach out, whether that's on social media, send us an email, info@trifectacollective.net, obviously on social media across the board. And I'm happy to do another episode and dive a little bit deeper into certain topics that you're interested in. So as always, please like, subscribe, follow. If it resonates, 5-star reviews really mean the world to us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.